For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Ukrainian troops are piling pressure on retreating Russian forces. They're pressing a counteroffensive that's produced major gains and a stunning blow to Moscow's military. Late Monday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said troops had retaken more than 6,000 square kilometers in a matter of weeks. Ukraine's leaders released footage showing their forces burning Russian flags and inspecting abandoned charred tanks. Reports of chaos abound as Russian troops pull out, as well as claims that they were surrendering en masse. Ukraine officials say they've captured so many soldiers they're struggling to house them. Ukraine's deputy minister of defense said Kiev is trying to persuade even more Russian soldiers to give up, launching shells filled with flyers ahead of their advance that say Russians use you as cannon fodder. Your life doesn't mean anything for them. You don't need this war. Surrender to armed forces of Ukraine. Russia's called the troop drawdown a regrouping, but even those who once backed the war are now critical of Putin's siege. Here's a Russian nationalist, Igor Girkin. His comments were translated by Al Jazeera.
I have an impression that in October our Russian army will break into pieces. It's not because they are incompetent or cowardly. It's because the Ukrainian army supply lines are much better than ours.
Ukraine's recapturing key areas is considered Russia's largest military defeat in its war since Moscow pulled back its forces from Kiev after a botched attempt to capture the capital city. The New York Times is reporting the U.S. Department of Justice has issued as many as 40 subpoenas in the past week in connection with its investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 election by former President Donald Trump and his allies. The Times said the subpoenas seek information related to a plan by Trump associates to submit slates of alternative electors from states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, which President Biden narrowly won in 2020. The goal was to submit names of electors who would cast their support for Trump instead of Biden, potentially upending the results. Congress, though, ultimately certified Biden despite a mob of Trump supporters storming the Capitol in a deadly siege on January 6th of 2021. Immigrants and their advocates rallied at the nation's capital Monday for immigration reform. Catherine Carley reports.
This is what community looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
Dozens of immigrants' rights activists gathered in Washington, D.C. Monday, demanding Congress cut funding for detention and deportation policies. Nilson Barahona, a Honduran native and former immigration detainee, spoke of the freedom America promises.
And freedom is a thing that they take away from us when we're looking for safety. This is not what United States stands for.
I'm Catherine Carley for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
Thousands of nurses in Minnesota launched a 3-day strike Monday, pressing for salary increases they say will help improve patient care by resolving understaffing stresses that have worsened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some 15,000 nurses at 7 healthcare systems in the Minneapolis and Duluth area walked out, a number the union says makes it the largest strike ever by private sector nurses. Nurses are seeking their pay raises of more than 30% over 3 years, while hospitals have offered 10 to 12%. The hospital systems say the nurses' demands are unrealistic, but Mary Turner, a nurse and head of the Minnesota Nurses Union, says it's not about the money, it's about staffing levels.
Their response back is, never will we let the nurses control the staffing grids. Never will we let the nurses have a say in our staffing on our floor. Well, that means they're telling us that we will not be allowed to do the job the way we are trained to do, and that is using our assessment skills and our knowledge and our know-how to keep the patients safe.
Freight railroads and their unions are facing pressure from business groups in the White House to settle a contract dispute. They face a looming strike deadline Friday. Business groups say a stoppage halting deliveries of raw materials and finished products would be an economic disaster. Amtrak, meanwhile, has suspended some of its long-haul routes starting today in anticipation of a strike. A new report from Earth Rights International charges the fossil fuel industry with targeting more than 150 climate justice activists in recent years with what the group calls judicial harassment, including lawsuits aimed at suppressing protests. The report identifies 152 cases where fossil fuel companies used what it calls judicial intimidation tactics to stop critics from organizing against oil, gas, and coal extraction. Many of those were targeted were protesters of the Dakota Access Pipeline and similar projects. A leading human rights group has called on the United Nations to ensure countries hosting the International Climate Conference are meeting human rights standards after documenting instances of repression against environmental activism in Egypt, this year's host. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for Pacifica Radio.